Hello and welcome to the NBA Outlet Preview Series presented by OTGBasketball.com. Make sure you follow OTG on Twitter at OTGBasketball. Also hit that subscribe button. I'm your host, Nick Fay. With me tonight, Kory, Waldron, Jack Manuell. What's up, fellas?
Got the OK3 with the OT3.
You know, I just got back from playing some pickup games of basketball, and in honor of doing this podcast, I wore a hoodie the entire time in honor of Melo.
Yes, good.
So, Jack just said, we're the big three of OKC right now. So, Kory already committed to Melo. Jack, who do you want?
I don't know, Nick. You are our fearless leader, so I feel like you have to be Russ, and that leaves me to be PG-13, I guess.
I appreciate that. So let's roll with it. OKC, you mentioned it. We got Westbrook, we got Melo, we got Paul George. One of the craziest off seasons for a team that really didn't have many assets going to the off season, and they're coming in at number 6 in our rankings. But before we talk about that, let's talk about last year. Obviously, Westbrook was a monster. What were your thoughts on OKC last season?
It was the year of Brody last year. I mean, his name's going to be mentioned a lot in this preview pod, especially when it comes to his last year's form. I mean, he had the most field goals made and missed, 824, 1,117. The most points per game, 31.6. The highest usage, 41.7. Among a string of other ridiculous stats. He carried his team to 47 wins. And in that, tying Oscar Robertson's record for triple doubles in a season at 41. They unfortunately were taken care of by the Houston Rockets in a gentleman's sweep, but it was a season for the ages thanks to Brody.
You summed it up pretty perfectly. It's not much. I'm just going to add a couple things off what you said because I think you're, spot on. It was pretty much all about Russell Westbrook. I mean, 44 triple doubles. I was watching the game live when he hit the game winner to seal the deal on that 44th triple double against the Denver Nuggets. You can't make that up. I mean,
no.
Go figure, the guy hits a game winner 3 buzzer beater, contested on that game. Like, that game is probably one of my favorite of all times from start to finish. I was glad to be able to watch that. Thank you, NBA League Pass. It's sad that, the Thunder didn't have a good enough team around him. As you mentioned, they got swept by the Rockets in 4 games. But, in every moment Westbrook was on the court, you had to watch the Thunder last year.
I think you mentioned that game against Denver when he hit that game winner. I think up to that point, it was pretty, 50-50 on the James Harden, maybe 60-40 Westbrook. But that shot in that moment kind of just clinched the MVP for him. But, you mentioned they kind of were carried offensively by Russ. But, surprisingly, OKC was a pretty good defensive team. I think they finished top 10 defensive rating, and they're one of the best rebounding teams in the league last season. So offensively, they didn't provide him with much, but the role guys kind of stepped up in other areas.
Yeah, I mean, you've got like an elite perimeter defender in Andre Roberson. You've got an elite interior defender in Steven Adams, who is probably one of the toughest, coolest guys in the NBA. I love the introduction between Melo and Steven Adams, where Melo was asked about him, and he's like, "That dude looks like he's from Game of Thrones." And then Steven Adams is like, "Oh, well, that's not very nice." And he's like, New Zealand accent. And I'm just like, Steven Adams on any team, but like he just fits so perfectly on with OKC. He's going to be there for his career after obviously signing that huge contract. But, I'm all in on Steven Adams. That Aussie, that intercontinental connection, I'm going to claim him as my own.
They need to get him a Game of Thrones cameo. Me and Kory talked about that. They got a few other guys in Game of Thrones. Go Steven Adams in there.
Drogo's
I feel like he could be
brother.
I was about to say he could be like a stunt guy for Khal Drogo.
His long lost brother is going to just pop up. But
for sure.
What was the highlight of the OKC season?
I don't know how much time you got, Nick. These are going to be related to Westbrook. His dagger dunk on Clint Capella. That I think everyone remembers that, and that was just otherworldly. That nutmeg pass on Corey Joseph.
That was nice.
To me, that was the pass and assist of the year, and I was really bummed that didn't make it. I was just absolutely. I mean, I'm all in on Brody. I've got my Brody jersey in my wardrobe right now. But he also had the highest scoring triple double ever. In that crucial game against the Magic where he got a 57-point triple double. Like it just boggles belief when we look back at it now. And like it really was, as I mentioned, it was a season for the ages. We're going to look back on this and go, we lived to see someone get 41 triple doubles and someone get, I think, was it 3 50-point triple doubles throughout the season? Personally,
that sounds right.
Yeah. And like 57, like it's just ridiculous. Like I love him. I love Brody. Why not?
The I'm just gonna pick a game that I can recall. March 29th. I'm acting like I'm reading this. I'm acting like I'm not reading this on a piece of paper right now.
Yeah.
March 29th, Orlando. Russell Westbrook had a 57-point triple-double. The Thunder were down by 21 going into the fourth quarter, and Westbrook hit like 6 threes down the stretch to bring them close, drive in, brought them into OT, and ended up winning the game. And, that was near the end of that, obviously the 44 triple doubles, and he got the Nuggets 44th a couple games after, or a couple weeks after. But, that was one of the moments where you're just just phenomenal. I mean, he's got that, I don't want to say Mamba mentality, I feel like we use that kind of often nowadays, but he has that kind of killer instinct. And he may not be the most efficient scorer. He may not be a guy who shoots over 50% often, but I mean, when the game is on the line at times, and I know when Kevin Durant was there, we can ridicule and say, he took too many shots away from Kevin Durant. But he does get the job done more times than not, it feels like.
Well, one thing you can definitely say, he's not afraid of taking that shot, and he's going to do everything in his power to make sure his team wins the game. Like you guys mentioned, the season he had, we could go over, numerous games of how successful he was. But the fact that he averaged a triple-double for a whole season with averaging over 30 points is kind of ridiculous. Like
It really is. Like, I think there's not enough adjectives, and we're writers here, Nick. Like, we don't have the necessary words to describe how ridiculous, for like the umpteenth time, how ridiculous this season was. Like, it will go down in history as one of the best individual seasons in NBA history, and we were in our prime of our lives to witness it. It's like Jordan in the mid 90s. It's just one of those years where we had James Harden, who obviously had an equally ridiculous year, but it was the year of Brody.
Yeah, I kind of feel bad for James Harden because his season was so historically great, and it's going to get overlooked so much because of Westbrook. But let's talk disappointments. Obviously, we mentioned the playoff disappointment, losing in the playoffs to the Rockets, I think in 5 games. What was your biggest disappointment of the season, though? Player-wise, play-wise, what do you think just kind of let you down for OKC?
Yeah, I'm going to go with the player. Going with Victor Oladipo, no longer with the team, with Kory's boys now. Despite the signing of a huge contract, Dips, as I like to call him, me and my mates like to call him, he couldn't be the foil to Westbrook that the team needed throughout the season. He struggled to really find his identity within the team. His shooting and playmaking left a lot to be desired, but he did see a minor increase from the perimeter. He's hoping Kory's Pacers can get more out of the newly acquired R&B crooner.
Yeah, he's got that little musical career going.
I love it. I think the album's out this weekend.
Yeah, I think it is too. I'm not going to go with Victor Oladipo. I think Victor Oladipo did okay last year. He was given being next to Westbrook. He can only do so much, I believe. He's still 24 years old. He's still a kid. And, his numbers raised, like you said, a little bit. Obviously, he wasn't spectacular. He was nowhere near like the Robin to Westbrook's Batman at all. I'm just going to go with the bench unit. One of the biggest factors of why they lost that first round series against the Houston Rockets was because when Westbrook went off the floor for 4 minutes, they went to like a negative 27 in those 4 minutes. Westbrook couldn't be off the floor for more than 2 minutes because the bench unit was horrific. And I get it because Westbrook was so high usage that the flow of the offense often was so much through him that it obviously hurts other people's ability to play, make, and do their own thing. But, I mean, somebody on the bench you need to step up, and no one did for the majority of last year.
Yeah, they needed somebody to step up as a playmaker. I'm going to go with a couple things. I guess Andre Roberson's three-point percentage, shooting 24% from 3 is really ugly, especially with the amount of open corner looks that he gets. If he could just shoot a respectable 30%, that would probably help him out a lot and help OKC out a lot. And in terms of Westbrook's spacing, we didn't even really mention that talking about Westbrook. He did this all last year with a terribly spaced team.
Yeah,
they play too big sometimes. They had a whole bunch of wing players that couldn't even shoot over 35% from 3. So that was rough. And then also disappointment, Enes Kanter's defense. It was just horrendous, and they couldn't even play him in the playoffs, even though they needed his offensive punch.
Yeah, I mean, both of those guys were disappointing in their own rights. But speaking of Roberson, did you guys catch any of the highlights?
Yes.
Oh, yeah. I watched the game. Hell no.
That was the best. And the fact that it wasn't just the hell nah, it was the waving of the hand so viciously. Like, the amount of savagery that took. And then he airballed it as well. So it's just like literally ripping out a guy's soul and just like stomping on it. It was just, I mean, I couldn't handle it. If I was Andre Roberson, you'd be forced to retire almost. It was that.
He getting psyched out in preseason game 1 by Chris Paul. Like,
and they could face him in the finals.
That's going to hurt his confidence. If I was Chris Paul, Chris Paul is definitely a big trash talker too. So I'm sure he's going to let him know about that all season.
Definitely.
How many times did Roberson probably see that play already just because it was on Twitter? I remember seeing it, and I saw it like 20 more times the next hour.
Yeah,
it went
the
viral.
only point I wanted to make is I thought, not that I thought truly, but I had hoped that this offseason he would just work on a three-point jump shot. And it just goes figure, the first one he takes or one of the first ones he takes is just an air ball, and he gets absolutely destroyed and becomes a viral video.
I think, calling it an air ball is a little bit nice because that shot right out of his hand looked like it had no chance. It was like a foot to the left. I was like, honestly, I could probably shoot better lefty and hit the rim. Like, I'm not saying I'm a great three-point shooter because I'm definitely not. But at least, make contact with the rim or be within, 6 inches.
What is worse, Andre Robeson's three-point shooting or Dwight Howard's free throw shooting?
Wait, better question. What's worse, Roberson's three-point shooting or his own free throw percentage?
He's pretty horrible. He is pretty trash. That's fair call there, Kory. Like, I think he's probably only about 10% above Dwight Howard off the top of my head. He's definitely.
Yeah, I'm gonna go find out. I'm gonna find out. I have to look at Dwight Howard's. I know Roberson shoots 42% from three. From the free throw line.
It's crazy. And, the fact is he cost himself a lot of money this offseason. If he could shoot the three, he would be an ideal 3-and-D type player because we mentioned it, he's an elite defender. Like, it's going to be in a great situation now because he wouldn't have to worry about scoring as much. But last season they needed the scoring. Now it doesn't really matter as much.
No.
Yeah, Dwight Howard is a higher free throw percentage shooter than Andre Roberson.
The guy that OTG and us three especially have, well, not me necessarily, but like we have shit on more than anyone in this pod series.
And random fact, Dwight Howard has tweeted OTG once before.
Really?
Yeah, when one of our writers was talking a little trash about him, he responded.
I feel like there's a history and it's only going to get worse. But he'll prove us wrong this year, I got a feeling. But yeah, that's pretty staggering to have a shooting guard that is paid to make shots. Like that's the definition of your position. You're a shooting guard. Whereas, Dwight can get away with it being, just a dinker and dumper guy just laid in on, and same with DeAndre. Like,
yeah, it's crazy. But moving on for Roberson, we're going to talk ranking. OKC came in at number 6. This was in before the Carmelo Anthony trade. So now they have Carmelo Anthony, and, they were at number 6. Do you have them at 6 still, or do you think they're a little bit higher, a little bit lower? What are your thoughts on this, or do you think this is actually fair, even though they have Melo now?
Look, I think it's pretty fair. I think there's still a lot of question marks around the team in general. But you can certainly make a case for them to have a much higher ceiling. But still, like with a lot of these sort of new acquisitions in the exciting teams in Minnesota, in Houston, even in Denver, the chemistry is going to take time. Everyone talks about the Miami Heat Big Three going, I believe, 7-9 in their first year. There's a lot that needs to be done in terms of for Billy Donovan, in terms of what plays they're going to run, how they're going to use Paul George and Carmelo Anthony to pick and roll. Paul George, obviously, is an off-ball player and an on-ball player. Like, how does the usage rate go? How does Steven Adams get involved? Because he's obviously an integral part. So there's a lot of question marks, but I think the talent alone, I think, can get them above that 6 ranking.
If they're any better than a 6, they're 5 at best. I think I mentioned this before on Twitter. The move is very good, but there is still a lot of talent in that Western Conference, and I don't know if this makes them better than Houston. Still, maybe it makes them about even with San Antonio. But yeah, this is exactly where they should be.
Yeah, I mean, not to give away our rankings, but I probably would put them in the top five, and I might drop San Antonio down a little bit, just because I don't think they did a ton. They have some guys returning from injury. LaMarcus Aldridge, I don't think is magically going to get really good. I think, like Jack mentioned, there's just so much talent on this team that they'll eventually make it work. I don't know if they'll have a great regular season, but come playoff time, you're not going to want to face a team that has a Westbrook, a Paul George, and a Carmelo Anthony. All guys that have something to prove in the playoffs too.
Yeah, there's definitely a chip on their shoulders.
Especially Melo. But we'll talk more Melo in a little bit. Moving on to the offseason, they were pretty active, like we mentioned. Draft wise, they picked up Terrence Ferguson. He played professionally overseas last year. Young guy, very raw. What are your thoughts on him, and what do you expect from him this season?
Yeah, this guy spent more time in my neck of the woods in Australia last year than I did. Played last year in the NBL, the National Basketball League in Australia, for the Adelaide 36ers. 76ers. We obviously don't have very original names out in Australia. He played the majority of the season, but he was more of a bench piece, funnily enough. He played 15 minutes a game. It took guts for a guy to skip college and still maintain his decent draft stock, still being a number one pick. He's got really good quickness, a good spot-up shooter. So that will fit in nicely in terms of the spacing that OKC is starting to create. And he's also noted for his maturity. Despite his relatively young age, at the age of 19. If I was to comparison, I reckon he could be he has an upside of like a Gerald Green type, maybe even better.
Gerald Green type. That's pretty fair. He's got a good balance. They need anything because even watching a couple of the preseason games early on, the bench unit is still extremely suspect. I worry about this team. Obviously you can play one of your superstars at all times since you have three of them now. But, I think you definitely need someone on the bench to step up. You need someone who can shoot. So he definitely has the opportunity to earn some minutes here.
Yeah, I think there's a possibility for him to get minutes later in the season. I think one thing that'll probably hurt him, I think he's very skinny. He needs to put on a little bit more size, especially to mess around on the wing in the NBA. So that'll probably hold him back. They do have some other veterans, but we'll see what happens. Let's talk big moves. They made all the big splash moves on the trades this year. They came out of nowhere and grabbed Paul George from Indiana. None of us really thought that was a real possibility. Next thing you know, Victor Oladipo and Sabonis are traded for Paul George. What does he bring to this team? Were you surprised he landed in OKC, and how do you think he feels about being in OKC?
The most recent thing I listened to, he had a podcast where he was interviewed by Sam Amick of USA Today. Really interesting listen, and how he was saying how much he's starting to really enjoy OKC, sees similarities in Indiana to those early days, likes the sort of, but he can go fishing, he can, spend time with his family and stuff. He's developed quite a good relationship with Russ. I think they're really gonna get along. They're gonna become like super bros. Like, unlike KD and Russ sort of had their differences, I think Russ and PG are cut from the same cloth. PG is elite in so many ways. Athleticism, shot making, defense, and they gave away nothing. Like, let's be real. Like, it was just Sam Presti, putting his hand for GM of the year already. He's going to be the perfect foil number 2 guy to Russ. But I think question that I'll ask you guys is, how long do you think he'll actually stay in Oklahoma? Does Russell Westbrook's extension make it a bit more likely?
Yeah, I think it makes it more likely. Why not? You get Paul George in there. They took a flyer because, as we know, of all the Laker rumors and everything else. You get Melo. It shows, but the biggest issue Paul George had with Indiana was the fact that he didn't feel like they did enough or they made the right moves to bring in the kind of talent alongside Paul George that could win him a championship. And within his first month of being there, 2 months or whatever, they go out and trade for Carmelo Anthony. Russell Westbrook re-signs for 5 years, the Supermax or whatever it is. I think it looks like, well, first of all, there's two things. One, we will make moves to keep the team competitive and we'll give you a chance to win a title. And two, we take care of our guys.
Yeah.
And I think those two things are very important. Like you said, Paul George is a very big fisher. And I'm sure the small market field of the Thunder has been very nice to him. And then just the fact where when he starts playing in front of those fans, OKC fans are one of the best in the NBA. They're loud.
Yes.
They have that college atmosphere. And I'm sure he's going to love that even more. And like you also mentioned, Jack, George is a great elite player. I don't think he's a number one option on a team. With the Pacers, he was phenomenal for the 7 years we had him. But he's a better off-ball player. And I think, like you said, with him and Russ, you won't have to worry about who's Batman and who's Robin. He'll be okay with being Robin. Melo is a different story. But I think Paul George will accept the role that, Russ is the alpha dog and you can be the beta dog and be just as good.
What type of success do you think would guarantee Paul George staying in OKC? Western Conference Finals appearance, a Finals appearance. What do you think would guarantee he stays there? Any type of success this season, or it's just kind of up in the air regardless?
I think it's hard to put a nail on it right now, Nick. There's so many things that could happen going into the season. There could be injuries to any of those big three out there. They could have a dream run, land in the Western Conference Finals and get blown out by the Warriors. I think the key thing, and I tweeted this on my personal account, my personal Twitter account, that I took from the interview with Sam Amick, is that Paul George is prioritizing winning over everything. So, like, if he's to stay, OKC will need to win.
Yeah, no, I think sign, because I gotta be honest, the him going to LA,
it certainly evens up the odds quite a bit.
Yeah, I think the LA rumors are just a load of crap. Personally, I understand the desire, but like, you're not gonna compete. I mean, maybe if LeBron goes to LA and like sets the stage, Paul George would be like, all right, I want to play with the greatest player of all time. Whoops, I said that. But I'm a little off track now. I think you have to get out of the first round. Paul George hasn't been able to get out of the first round in the last 3 years. Granted, the third, 3 years ago, he was coming back from the leg injury, so it wasn't like it was a healthy Paul George. But you need to get to the second round, and I think that second round, whether you're playing the Spurs, the Rockets, or the Warriors in that second round, you gotta take them to at least six, hopefully 7. You have to show that you're like right there, like just on the cusp of going farther. And I think if they make the Western Conference Finals, forget it. He's in OKC for the next 4 years.
All right, that's Paul George. We'll talk a little bit more Paul George in a bit. But then, not only did they grab one All-Star, they grabbed another All-Star, and that's Carmelo Anthony. They traded Enes Kanter, Doug McDermott, and a second-round pick. Not much at all. Sam Presti's been doing an amazing job picking up talent like this. What are your thoughts on Carmelo in OKC? Obviously, Melo for the longest time was only going to Houston. He finally opened up, his trade destinations, and he ended up in OKC.
Look, I think he's found his perfect destination, the Thunder. As the third option by default, Coach Donovan's going to be able to utilize the things that Melo is elite at. He's an elite post player. He's an elite player at hitting contested shots and just flat out getting buckets. He's also going to provide some very, very valuable spacing, which is going to impact not only himself, but his teammates. He was just under 38% in his entire tenure with the Knicks. And Kory's boy, PG-13, over the last 2 seasons was 39.1%. So that's 2 elite perimeter guys that you've got, which allows you to play an Andre Roberson, who we've mentioned consistently. So it provides them spacing and provides them scoring punch, offensive punch. Plus, I think playing him at the 4, as they've mentioned, is going to be really valuable as well.
Huge. Monumental is Melo playing at the 4. Westbrook is not a very good defender, but he's an average defender that can play defense when he wants to. Roberson, we know, is an elite defender. Paul George is a very good elite wing defender. Steven Adams is a very good rim protector. Melo is not a great defender, but going up against 4s, he can probably hold his own with his weight, and you can still hide him at times because you have so many decent defenders around him. And then, like you mentioned, Jack, for spacing purposes, Melo alongside Paul George, those are 2 3-point shooters that creators in the first place that Russell Westbrook hasn't had since Kevin Durant, obviously, and James Harden. So obviously it's going to pay dividends. I did a my GM sim, and this Thunder team won like 56 games, and Melo tore his ACL right before the playoffs start. So hopefully Melo doesn't tear his ACL. But this big three, because of how talented they are as shot creators, and Russell Westbrook obviously is the all-around player, and Melo has just intangibles. Talking about a gold medalist. People want to say that Melo's not a good leader. If you read Lance Thomas put an article in the Players Tribune about Carmelo Anthony, and saying how he may not be the guy who gets in your face as a leader, but he's one of those guys, a friendly leader. He picks you up, he keeps you motivated, and I think that's good because Westbrook seems to be the kind of guy who would get in your face. While you have, it's a good cop, bad cop. Russell Westbrook going to be the bad cop leader, and you have Melo to be the good cop leader.
Very good point. Yeah. I think the hate Kory, you and I are both from New York. We have a couple friends that are New York Knicks fans. The hate that Melo got was kind of uncalled for in New York. He never really had a great team, and I think the leadership thing was kind of a little bit overhyped a bit. But touching on your other point, the fact that they have Westbrook, Paul George, and Carmelo Anthony offensively, every time they come down the floor, there's a good chance they're going to be in a mismatch. There's going to be the other team's going to be at some disadvantage because you're not going to have three elite defenders necessarily that you could put on a Westbrook, you could put on a Paul George, and then you could put on a Melo. You know what I mean? It's not like a lot of defenses are equipped to defend guys like this in a starting lineup like this.
No, this team was equipped to go right at that one team that won a title last year. I can't think of their name right now.
But that might be the one team that could actually defend them, though. Because, just think about it. Not saying anybody's going to lock down a Westbrook, but, throw a Klay Thompson on a Westbrook. You throw a Kevin Durant on a Carmelo. You throw a Draymond Green on a Paul George, or, vice versa, Draymond on Carmelo, KD on Paul George. That's maybe one of the one teams that actually can D them up.
No, I agree. I think because I think that team is still better. But this team was definitely constructed, I feel like, to go head-to-head with that team in particular.
And I think the one nice thing about this, you touched on it earlier, Kory, the bench was so bad last year, they're going to be able to stagger minutes where they'll have at least one of their elite offensive players on the floor at all times. All three of these guys can get baskets when necessary. Each guy, any night, you could see someone drop 30.
I agree. Who do you guys think is the next legitimate challenger to the Warriors? Is it Houston? Is it the Spurs? Is it OKC? Or is it someone else completely?
Oh, that's a really tough question.
Well, Jack's trying to get us to leak information about the rest of the preview pods, but
I'm not asking for rankings. Not asking for rankings.
I know, but that would kind of give up my take. But personally, just looking at it right now, in my opinion, I know a lot of people are questioning that duo, but I like Houston the most, and that's just my opinion. I like Chris Paul. I like James Harden. I like the fact having two elite playmakers and a whole bunch of other role players that kind of can fit and match up with a Golden State because they have so many small ball lineups they can play. Houston right now might be my favorite team in the West to beat Golden State. It doesn't mean they're necessarily the second best team in the West, but in matchup wise, I think they could make the most interesting series.
I said this last year. I said I believe that the Houston Rockets was the biggest threat in the West to the Golden State Warriors. And I still believe that out West, that adding Chris Paul, like you said, Nick, you have two elite playmakers now. We saw what James Harden can do last year. And you have a bunch of role players who know their role. And they have a ton of shooting. They have a lot of wing defenders. The worst position is obviously Ryan Anderson. But that team is stacked. I think OKC definitely narrowed the gap. But, I think the bench unit and the lack of having guys like Abalamute that the Rockets have and all that is what hinders them.
Yeah, and I'm a little biased too. I like Chris Paul. I like James Harden. I also think Chris Paul realizes the moment. And I think both James Harden and Chris Paul are going to be able to play with a player. James Harden wasn't at this level in OKC, so I'm not going to include that. Are both going to be able to play with a player that can make for them and make their life 100 times easier.
Yep.
So, but Jack, what do you think? Who do you think would be your number one team to take out in Golden State?
So I'm thinking the Houston Rockets. I agree with you guys on that. You can't argue with two of the best ball handlers, playmakers in the NBA right now. But the wing depth as well that they've got. Looking Mute, PJ Tucker. Those are both elite 3-and-D guys. The Spurs lack that depth, but I still like what they've got. We go back to game 1 of that series last year. They were taking it right up to the Warriors.
Yeah, they were.
And they basically had what they have now. And you look at another year for DeJounte Murray. Manu Ginobili's going to do Manu Ginobili things. Tony Parker might actually be healthy by that time, because Aldridge apparently has had his grievances with Pop. So I think you could toss the coin. I like the continuity that Spurs have, but I'm gonna agree with you guys. I'm gonna go with the Houston dudes.
Yeah, you never can sleep on San Antonio. They have two guys named, Greg Popovich and Kawhi Leonard. Two guys that are two of the very best at what they do. So I think, yeah, exactly. And I think you always have to at least consider the Spurs, and they'll probably have some young international guy pop out of nowhere and have a great season that we didn't even know about. So that's probably something that happened in Spurs world. But let's talk rest of OKC's offseason. Free agency-wise, they did do a little bit to add to the bench. I know we've been critical of that bench. They did add a Raymond Felton. They did add a Patrick Patterson. They also added a few G League guys. What do you like from Felton? What do you like from Patterson?
What I like from Patterson, he gives them so much lineup versatility. He can play with the power forward, and I really want to see ultra small ball out in Oklahoma playing him at the 5. I think that'll be really exciting and can really stretch some defenses and offenses for that matter. They got him for me, this was one of the best deals in free agency and the trade period this year. 3 years, $16.4 million. Absolute steal. If you look at what Robeson's on, I think he's on about 3 years, $30 million, and that says something. Perfect 3-and-D power forward. He's a tad under 37% from the 3 for his career, so I think he's a great signing. And Felton, a nice veteran piece who was quite good for the Clippers last year.
Yeah, Patrick Patterson, when initially before they got Melo, I really liked the thought of having, a stretch 4, who can play a little bit more defense as Kantar can. He's obviously a better shooter than Taj Gibson. I like the versatility, and like you said, Jack, the small ball lineup they can run with, him at the 5, Melo at the 4, and even Paul George at the 3, Roberson, etc., and Westbrook. That could be a lot of fun watching that up-tempo type of everyone on the floor can shoot. And like you said, the contract, you can't go wrong, man. 3 years, $17 million, especially when especially because you knew you had to pay Russ if you wanted to extend him. You got Paul George lurking in the future. If Melo opts in, that's a ton of money. So
he's opting in.
Yeah, right. You have to assume so at least. Getting a guy like him for $17 million, that's beautiful with all the big contracts you're probably going to have on your contract, along with Steven Adams, for Christ's sakes. So I like that move. Raymond Felton, the guy, he's perfected the dad bod. Man, oh man. We were watching the preseason game the other night, and he looks like some guy they just saw on the street. It was like, yo, bro, like, you want to lace him up real quick? And he's like, screw it, man, I'm in there. He's okay. He can give you some good stretches. Like you mentioned, Jack, they didn't have a backup point guard for Russ. They brought in Raymond Felton. I think he'll be solid. They also brought in Isaiah Cannon, who played with Chicago last year, and he played with the Sixers before that. A decent three-point shooter, probably a better shooter than Felton. Probably not as good as a ball handler. But it's just they made a couple solid moves, I think, to definitely add depth to that wretched second unit.
Yeah, like you guys mentioned, I like the Patrick Patterson signing. Even before the Melo thing, I thought he would have been a nice person to slide into that 4 spot, gives him some good floor spacing. And then, Felton, obviously he's had his ugly stretches in the NBA, and like Kory mentioned, definitely not necessarily the best conditioned guy. But I think in this role, where he really won't have to do much even when he comes in off the bench, because there's a good chance that he's going to be playing with a Paul George or a Carmelo Anthony, or maybe even playing with Westbrook a little bit at times. I think it could really be a nice season for him, because he just is just going to have to, come in a couple minutes a game and just run the offense, get things running smooth, and play a little bit of D.
I was going to say that first preseason game, Raymond Felton wanted to be Russell Westbrook, because he almost every time he had the ball in his hand, he was putting up a shot.
He's like, let me get him in preseason. I'm not going to get much when regular season starts.
He's got 8.
But let's talk departures. Obviously when you do grab 2 guys like a Paul George or Carmelo Anthony, you will lose a few role players, but the guys they lost don't really add up to, the additions of a Paul George, Carmelo, Enes Kanter, Doug McDermott, Taj Gibson, Victor Oladipo, DeMontis Sabonis. Who do you think that they're going to miss the most out of all these departures?
I think it comes down. You can pick probably any of these guys. Domantas Sabonis, serviceable in his rookie season. Certainly hasn't touched anywhere near his potential. Oladipo probably had a better season off the court, dropping tracks with 2 chains than on the court. Apart from that contract extension, which was, beneficial for him, that's for sure. Enes Kanter, if you're a KC fan, you would have been sad to see him go because his love for that city and his love for his teammates, can't be understated, especially as a locker room presence. But low key, I liked the Taj Gibson acquisition late in the season. He had that impact defensively, was really good on the glass, nice physical presence down low. And as we mentioned on the Minnesota podcast, you know what you're going to get from him. And, I think Steven Adams steps up in his replacement and sort of fills that void naturally. I'm expecting a bigger season from him. So I don't think the loss of any of these guys is that great. And Doug McBuckets is just, I don't know if we can call him that anymore because he really doesn't get that many buckets anymore.
Yeah, he does.
It's Doug McBricky.
He lost the nickname.
I swear, every time I saw him shoot in the last season with the Thunder, he wasn't making anything.
No.
I'm gonna keep this nice and sweet. They ain't gonna miss anybody. I mean, this is how it is. You had to lose a couple bad eggs to get some superstar, or not. I don't want to say superstar. They get in some really good talent in Paul George and Anthony. Like you said, I think maybe emotionally you're gonna miss Kanter, but you're not gonna miss him playing defense for 1 second. So do you really miss that? Probably not. But yeah, you had to get rid of these guys.
Yeah, I mean, nothing that they did is like, oh my God, why'd they lose that guy? Like, they lose a guy like Kanter. He can't play him defensively in the playoffs. McDermott, who is no longer McBuckets, he can't do that. Taj is, like you said, Jack, a solid piece, but he's not somebody you're gonna really worry about because he doesn't shoot the ball well. You already have a really good interior defender in Steven Adams, so it's not a big deal. Oladipo, you didn't really want to pay him that money, and you ended up getting Paul George. That's an easy upgrade right there. Sabonis, he could turn out to be a pretty good player, but it's not like he has all-star all written all over him. So I think everything was pretty good for OKC. What would you give Sam Presti for the job he did this offseason?
A+. Also, quick side note, in defense of Taj Gibson, in that preseason game, I think it was against the Lakers.
He did shoot corner threes. I know.
He did, yeah. I knew you would have seen them. So I was like, sure, Nick saw these. And they looked fluid. Like, there was, no rattle at all. Like, that was money.
Yeah.
Who knows? Maybe Tibbs has got him doing some other stuff, expanding his skill set. But yeah, you've got to give on the subject of Presti, you've got to give him an A+. There's no other real GM that had a better offseason. I think Koby Altman out in Cleveland had a decent return for his first season in charge. But still, a lot of those pieces can be debated. Daryl Morey, we know he's a seasoned veteran. And other than that, there's just not that many guys. So, Sam Presti all the way. He's got, I think his ability to execute a vision and execute his moves, it leaves a lot to be desired for the other guys because, you look at in Phoenix or even, back in the years with Minnesota, lack of vision, they lack direction, whereas Sam Presti knows what he wants and he knows he can get it. He's very Sam, I reckon we should give him as the nickname.
Yeah, I think you can't understate the job Sam Presti has done this offseason. OKC looked like they could have been in a bad spot after losing Kevin Durant. The Westbrook extension was up in the air. And, even, the moves to get Paul George and Carmelo Anthony, obviously, both are A+ moves for what you gave up for the talent you got in return. Re-signing Russell Westbrook is an A+ type of move because you're keeping, one of the top 5 best players in the league, and then you brought in some solid role players. So yeah, I think Sam Presti, hats off. He did a magnificent job this offseason.
Yeah, he's more like, you guys said A+, but he's like an A++++. Like, what does he do on these trade calls? Like, what he call Indiana? He's like, so I was thinking about, offering you guys Victor Oladipo and Domantas Sabonis for Paul George. I think this is a fair trade. These are two young players. Like Paul George is going to LA, like it doesn't matter. And then Ennis Cantor and Doug McDermott in a second round pick for Carmelo Anthony. Like they got a salary dump. Like they didn't want Cantor's contract. They tried to move him before that, and he's able to get a plus player back. Like it's crazy what he did with the lack of. He didn't trade a pick. He didn't trade a first round pick.
No, and I mean that second round pick is going to be kind of high because it's via Chicago. But I think a lot of partly those two moves may have had to do something with New York and Indiana. Apparently Kevin Judd, Kory might know a bit more about this, didn't want in the East at all, so he wanted to ship him out west to a team that they didn't think would have an impact. So he's just like, all right, let's just. It was almost an FU move, like a kick on the ass on his way out the door. And Carmelo the sort of same. They didn't want to trade him, and it was almost like they didn't want to give him the satisfaction of sending him to Houston, because I'm sure the deal that Houston could have given him for a Ryan Anderson and some sort of pick sort of equals what and Doug McBricks, trade is. It's I don't know. It's really hard to say, Kory. He might have a silver tongue. We don't know. Maybe he's. I literally can't explain it.
Guys, like I already got it all figured out. It's pretty simple. You guys, you gotta read in between the lines. Sam Presti's a Jedi. He's a Jedi. He used some Jedi mind tricks. It's obvious. Come on. He said these are the trades you're looking for, and Kevin Pritchard shot it off, and Steve Mills shot his. They couldn't resist. The Jedi mind is definitely strong.
Like maybe he has like a psychology degree or something, and he's just like really psyching these dudes out. But moving on from there, let's talk. Back to a little bit more basketball stuff. Starters. I think the starting lineup for me is pretty locked in. What are your guys' thoughts on it?
Yeah, it's a lock. I think the funny thing that we've all heard is that at media day, Russ in that hoodie of his was asked. It was put to him, "Would you come off the bench?" He's like, "Bench." So there's no way Melo until he's probably 40 won't come off the bench. So yeah, we got Russ, we got Roberson, we got PG, we got Hoodie Melo, and of course we got the Khal Drogo lookalike Kevin Adams.
Yeah, that's spot on. That soundbite is absolutely hilarious because he looks over at somebody. He goes, "You hear that?" He said, "You had to come off the bench," and he started laughing. That was a good soundbite. Yeah, that started.
Do not disrespect the Hoodie Melo.
Yo, and I'm telling you what, that first preseason game, he scored 19. That boy looked pissed off. Let me tell you.
See what I mean? It's a great situation for Melo. He knows about all the hate he catches. The ESPN ranking of 64, all that nonsense. So, but I think you guys got it spot on. Russ, Roberson, PG, Melo, Adam. Yeah, we're locked. But let's talk breakout starter. Who's breaking out in the starting lineup? Who's having a big season?
I'm hoping I don't have the same as you guys, but I'm going with my fellow Australian Kiwi brother, Steven Adams. He had a serviceable season by his standards last year. Still a decent, solid defensive anchor, though he didn't take that expected leap on the offensive end. But I think this, as I mentioned earlier, the better spacing with the acquisition of Melo, George, and Patterson, expected an increase on that end, which will lead to a breakout year. He's got all the tools, I reckon, to be a top 10 center in this league, Adams. He just needs a system around him to function better. And he also has probably the greatest facial hair and mustache and in the NBA and in all of sport.
Oh, wow. Man, oh, man, oh, man. This is tough because there's a lot of guys I want to pick for this. I'm going to pick Carmelo Anthony, though.
Melo.
I'm not going to pick the easy choice in Westbrook. I'm going to pick Melo for a lot of the reasons we mentioned, the scrutiny he received in New York, the debacle that became at the end, the people that still are saying, that he's a ball stopper, he can't play alongside a guy like PG and Russ. I think Melo is going to have one of his best seasons. I truly believe it. I don't know how many points he's going to average. I don't know the analytics behind what he's going to do this season. But I'm expecting an efficient, a locked in, and I'm expecting us to see one of the best versions of Melo we've seen since that Nick playoff run that Nick mentioned a few years back.
Yeah, I think you mentioned Westbrook. I think it'd be hard for Westbrook to have a breakout season. Paul George, I don't see a huge jump. Roberson, we already talked enough shit about his shooting. Adams is a solid choice, but I'm gonna go with you, Kory. I think Melo, like we're gonna see we're not gonna see Olympic Melo, but we'll see something closer to that in this role where he's gonna have, the third option defensively on him, where he's gonna be matched up against four some nights, where he's not gonna be getting double teamed, where he's not gonna be getting a lot of attention. Everybody's gonna be worried about Westbrook. He collapses the defense better than, most players in the NBA. There's not many guys who can do it better than him. So the amount of open shots Carmelo's going to see is probably more than maybe the last 3 seasons he's had in New York. And I'm not even exaggerating.
Yeah, and let's mention this too. Melo is not a bad passer. He may not pass a ton, but he's not a bad passer. And when it's similar to Westbrook, I mean, there wasn't a lot of floor spacing out in New York last year. It's not like there was any special players alongside of him. I mean, I guess Porzingis is a very good young piece, but it's not like he has arrived, per se yet in the league. So, I think it gets over exaggerated his passing abilities.
Plus, this is the first year one of the only years Melo actually has a great point guard with him. You look at throughout his career. What have we got? Like Chauncey Billups, an aging Jason Kidd, an aging Allen Iverson. Russell Westbrook is by far the best point guard and distributor that he's ever had. And I think, to have someone feeding you the ball, getting you good looks, is only going to improve Melo's efficiency, which has always been a knock on him.
Yeah, for sure. So we'll see. Definitely, he's one player I'm going to be watching all year long. But breakout bench player.
I think for me, it's got to be Patterson, the guy we've been raving about on that contract. He's going to be integral to the success of the Thunder this year. I think he's their most important bench piece, by quite a margin. He gives them versatility, he gives them defense, he gives them spacing. But as I mentioned, I want to see him at the 5, sort of like a la Draymond Green, LeBron James, those sort of roles. I think we're going to be seeing a lot of that this season. Alongside Jeremy Grant, those two guys are going to be very important as sort of wing spacers. I'm going to echo a sentiment that I made on the Clippers pod that the Raptors' loss is the Thunder's gain.
I like that. I'm going with the guy you just briefly passed over, Jeremy Grant. Maybe it's because he's from Syracuse and I'm in New York that I feel a little connection. This is a young kid. He's going to be 23 next year. He's only entering his 4th year in the NBA. He's a very good wing defender. I think he's actually an underrated defender. He's actually an extremely good defender. He's very athletic. The one knock against him is he's an inconsistent 3-point shooter. Last year he shot 37% on 1.5 attempts. So what the hell does that even mean? But I think, with having the talent alongside of him, you're going to be playing for more this year, I think, in OKC than last year. And I think a lot of these younger guys will understand that. They'll be able to learn a little bit more from these veterans they have. Grant to play some big-time minutes off the bench. And I think we'll even see a couple lineups where we see him at a stretch 4 or, we'll see him, maybe Paul George play at the 2, Jeremy Grant at the 3, and Russ and Melo out there too. There's a lot of little combinations you can do with how this small ball era has arrived.
Well, and they have a lot more versatility with the roster they have. Like Jack mentioned, the Patrick Patterson, the Grants, these guys are all guys that can play multiple positions, defend multiple positions. So that's something interesting. I'm going to go with another guy, though. I'm going to go with Alex Abrinas. I think they need some shooting. I know a lot of OKC guys are high on him, and I think he could give them some scoring punch off the bench, and he could be somebody that comes in and spaces the floor. Best case scenario win-wise and playoff-wise for OKC next year.
Best case win-wise, I'm going to go 60 wins, top 2 in the West. And they got the 3rd highest payroll, funnily enough, behind only the Cavs and Warriors. So, they're really all in on this season. Sam Presti, obviously, and the ownership out there. I think we've talked a little bit about what they sort of have to do in terms of the playoffs to keep a sort of Paul George and entice him and lure him back next season. I think they need to have at least 1 round win. I think to give that taste of success back to Paul George, maybe you make the finals. I think that'll certainly increase their chances of securing PG-13 services.
I'm going with 60 wins. I do think there might be a slight learning curve, but when you have this much talent between your top three guys, and like we mentioned, you can stagger the minutes. If these guys stay healthy, I mean, man, OKC is going to be really fun to watch and an extremely tough out. And to anyone who plays them, despite, playoffs, whoever they get matched up against, you're not going to want to play OKC.
For me, I think high 50s, best case scenario. I think, with the talent they have, there's a real possibility for them to be a really good team. But we also have to remember they are playing in the West. They still have to match up with other good teams. And the chemistry could be a little bit of an issue. I think early on there could be a little bit of, who's shooting when, who's shooting what, pass the ball here, don't pass the ball, et cetera, et cetera. So that's always something to keep an eye on. But worst case scenario for OKC next year?
Worst case, I got them finishing outside the top four. There's chemistry issues between Paul George, Russ, and Melo. If maybe mid-season, Melo doesn't fit in and somehow regresses. They're still obviously making the playoffs. There's no doubt about that. But they finished maybe with like a 47, 48 wins, similar to sort of last year. I can't see them getting any lower than that.
Yeah, I think worst case scenario is just under 50 wins, like 49 wins. That's staggering out of the gate. But even still, that's an improvement from last year.
Yeah, I think there's no way this team doesn't make the playoffs or win high 40s. They could lose one of these guys, knock on wood. They could lose, probably Paul George or Melo and still have a really good season. Just wouldn't be as successful playoff-wise. But, they have so much talent. But realistically, what do you expect from OKC this year?
I'm giving them, somewhere in the middle of what we've been talking about. Give them 55 wins. Third or fourth out in the West, depending on how the Spurs and Rockets go, as we mentioned. It could take time in terms of gelling, in terms of that system. What can Billy Donovan do in terms of lineups? He's got a lot of possibilities that we've harnessed on, we've hopped on. But I can see them getting as high as the second, as I mentioned, but I'm going with the third seed.
I'm going with 55 wins and a 4 seed in the West.
So that sounds about right. I have them around that low 50, 52 to 54 win range, probably right on that cusp of the top 4, maybe that 4 seed, maybe that 5th seed. It's going to be interesting. I think for me, I'll be concerned the most about is, chemistry. Not only do they have a lot of, new star players, they also have some new bench guys they need to incorporate. So we'll see what happens with that. And like I mentioned, the West is no joke. Even some of these mediocre teams are going to be playing hard every night, and they're not going to be easy W. What do you guys think? Do you think it is a possibility, if you had to give me a percentage chance that OKC ends up in the finals, what percentage do you think they end up in the finals?
The NBA finals or the Western Conference finals?
The NBA finals.
Okay.
NBA, yeah, that's a tough one. I gave the Wizards a pretty high score on their pod due to the fact that they're in a weakened East, and there's a lot less variability for them. But out west for OKC, the talent is certainly there. If they can get it clicking at the right time, George is a master come playoff time. And I think he's going to be integral to that. Melo's going to love playing the playoff basketball again, finally. I can't give them any more than maybe a 10, 15%.
I'm going with, let's see, 85. Doing math in my head. I'm going to give them 6%. A 6% chance to make the NBA Finals.
I got them at 5%. I think even if something were to happen to Golden State, it'd still be extremely difficult to beat the other two teams we mentioned, a Houston and even a San Antonio, just because of their experience. But talent does help you win games. And like you mentioned, Jack, Paul George gets locked in playoff time. Melo hasn't played in the postseason in a while, and we know what Westbrook's going to do every night. And this year in the playoffs, he actually might not be completely washed by the fourth quarter. He won't have to put up 40 points in the first 3 and then have no energy come clutch time.
Yeah, that's a key. I think with all these sort of new super teams, it's going to be key health-wise. Who's going to be the freshest? A lot of teams, when it came playoff time, especially the Houston Rockets, James Harden was gassed. Out in Washington, as we mentioned on their pod, John Wall was gassed. Now that Russ doesn't have to do everything, as you mentioned, Nick, stagger his minutes. Put Raymond Felton out there for 5-10 for 5 minutes at a time with Paul George and Carmelo Anthony. You don't have to keep him out there for 10 minutes a quarter and at 100 miles an hour, because Russ only knows one way. He goes 100 miles an hour 100% of the time. If you can get that energy from him in shorter bursts, then boy, it's going to be a scary proposition for some other teams out west.
No, I agree. No, voice crack. I agree. That's spot on. If imagine a scenario last year against the Rockets where Russell Westbrook could have taken 4 minutes off between the third and fourth quarter. Some of those close games against the Rockets going into the fourth quarter, who knows what happens if Westbrook has fresh legs, or not fresh legs, but who's left in those, full-on hard impact drive. He's all downhill. He said,
yeah.
He only knows one speed, and that's 110%.
Well, 2 points of that, and not only do you think I think it'll help him in terms of offensively being more efficiently. I think he won't really have an excuse this year not to play defense. Last year was easy to kind of give him the pass because he did so much offensively, but this year I think he has to come back and play better defensively. Obviously, as an athlete, he's as elite as they get, so it's more about the focus and putting in the work. So I think this year I'm kind of interested to see what he does on that side of the ball. And also, you guys mentioned the 100%, going 100, downhill all the time. I would like to see him calm down a little bit this year. I know it's like you don't want to tell him to completely calm down, but with having 2 other players on the floor, he won't have to be aggressive and try to attack 4 guys in the paint. Now he'll have the opportunity to kick the ball to a Paul George or a Carmelo Anthony, or hit Adams for, a layup now, because there's not going to be as much attention on him. But if there is, he needs to make sure he does what's best for his team.
I think he can do that. He proved that with Kevin Durant in his final few seasons there. A lot of people have been sort of comparing these teams, this OKC team now, to previous OKC teams. Was it like the Harden and Durant days? Was it like the final 2 years of Durant without Harden? I think Russ has shown he's not an idiot. He knows how to play basketball. He knows how to read the game. He has a good basketball IQ. Yes, he can be a little bit irrational and a bit erratic at times, but you don't want to take a player's one of their best assets, their passion and their drive for the game, away from them and say, "Oh, look, Russ, you got to chill out, mate." Scott Brooks was one that advocated for Russ being Russ, basically, and that's why we have the Russell Westbrook we have today. Scott Brooks has got the same out of John Wall. He's elevated his game, so I think you're treading on ice a little bit there, Nick, if you're telling Russ to take a step back. But I think he has the basketball IQ to do so if it were to come to that.
Yeah, just play smarter. I think it's a good point you make, Nick. Even with Durant at times, there would be those close game stretches late in the game, and Westbrook would push the tempo all by himself and run into 4 defenders, and you're left there, scratching your head like, bro, you don't really need to be going at 110 miles per hour. You have, Kevin Durant. The game's close. Rely on your teammates. Maybe maturity, it will be a little bit different having Paul George and Melo, hopefully, but I think you just have to pick your times to be a crazy maniac with your speed.
Yeah, you don't need – I don't think that he should cut it out. I'm just saying that I think he should take a step back from it this year, especially in the sense where he's not in an advantage. Like you mentioned, Jack, he does have a high basketball IQ, but he does make bad decisions. He gets irrational at times, and that was obviously somewhat of the OKC team last year. But in this year, there's not really much of an excuse because there's going to be a Paul George, there's going to be a Carmelo Anthony, and like we mentioned, even a Patrick Patterson shooting threes, some other veterans around that can really help you. I don't want him to stop being who he is, but he needs to realize that some situations he has to do what's best for the team, and that doesn't mean just going 100% downhill, like Kory said, into 4 defenders and not ending up with a thing. I think what I want to see from Westbrook this year, and this is probably my biggest hate on him last year, is I want to see him make his teammates better. I think he needs to improve on that aspect. Like last year, it's hard to make that team better, but I think this year I want to see him make life easier for his teammates.
And I think it's going to be go both ways in terms of Paul George making life easier for Russell Westbrook and Melo making easier for Russell Westbrook, and in tandem for those three guys. I think they're all going to make each other's life easier. Russell Westbrook, it's going to be Melo will make life easier. Melo and PG will make life easier for Russell Westbrook, because if he does drive and he draws those defenders, and he doesn't have to take that crazy wild layup that we know he can make, he can kick it out for a more efficient play and go, oh, look, I got Paul George on the perimeter. Oh, look, I got Melo in the corner. So I think, and at the same time, if Melo and PG create a nice pick and roll game for him, and their off-ball game is known, and Russ can just take a possession or two off. He can just dump it into Melo in the post, and Melo can just do his work, because we know he's one of the elite post players when it comes to the wing position in the NBA. So I agree with you in what you said there, definitely.
I'd like to see a little bit of Westbrook Melo pick and roll this year. I think that could be an interesting thing. Kevin Durant,
Definitely.
Westbrook ran that a little bit. And, with Melo's pick and pop ability, I think that could be something interesting, especially with him playing at the 4. It could be mismatch city. And what you're always trying to do is get mismatches and put your opponent at a disadvantage. And this OKC team can definitely do that in a lot of situations. Expecting a big year from Billy Donovan. But on to something a little bit more fun. The truth. And my emoji today is, I only have one. I was going to go with multiple, especially when Jack came from my head last episode. But I'm going with the evil, like the purple emoji with the horns.
Yes.
That evil face, because I think all these guys are savages. Like Westbrook, Paul George, Carmelo, they're all going in 100%. They have something to prove. And I would just love to see an OKC Golden State match up in the playoffs. And I just want to see savage mode from everybody.
Like I'm salivating at the prospect already. I'm looking forward to the regular season games, because the pettiness. Last year was good enough when it came to OKC Golden State, but now OKC have a legitimate team here that can actually Golden State. We were all watching last year's games just to see the whole Russell Westbrook, Kevin Durant thing, the whole cupcake saga. But this year, Russ has some teammates that can back him up a little bit. Always killing it with the emoji game, Nick. Your analysis and in-depth insight is second to none. But I'm going to go with something. Paul George tweeted it when the team got Melo. It's just the lightning emoji. Simple as that. Just that lightning emoji.
All right, a little thunderstruck.
Little thunderstruck. Kevin Durant style. Not Space Jam, but still
that was one
a pretty horrible movie.
Yeah. Definitely. I'll watch the Thunder over that movie for sure. We'll spoil it. My emoji is the money bag.
Money bag.
For so many reasons. Westbrook got paid. Melo's going to get paid. You're hoping this season worked out so you can pay Paul George and keep Paul George. Sam Presti earned his money by putting together this roster. This team could, they could run the table a little bit. Obviously, we have to see how they work on the court, but this is a team, like we mentioned, I gave them a 5%, 5 or 6% chance to make the NBA Finals. Nick, you gave them 5%. I'll give them, though, a 40% chance to make the Western Conference Finals. I think the chances of them making the Western Conference Finals are definitely higher than them making the Finals, especially if they get like a 3 seed. They don't have to match up with the Warriors in the first round, who will be a 1 seed. I definitely like the thought of all of these guys together. I think this is a money-winning team.
No money, no problems.
Good emojis today, guys. As always, let's talk League Pass, though. Give me your rank for this team, 1 out of 10.
Highest League Pass rating, and I'll be disappointed, Kory, if you undersell these guys. I'm going to be pissed, mate. I'm giving them a 9. They're the must-watch team of the NBA, let alone in the West. Outside of LeBron James, Russ is my favorite player to watch on an opposing team. And I'm just rooting for Sam Presti for going all in, similar to what Morey's doing. They've got that still out in Oklahoma. They've got that underdog mentality. They're not the big glamour market teams. Sam Presti and Oklahoma don't have a lot of glitz and glamour out there. But they've got Russ, they've got PG, they've got Melo, they've got the formula. Can all mix together and make some magic.
Don't worry, Jack. I'm not going to disappoint you. Ain't
Good.
no underselling. I'm actually the biggest League Pass rating I've given out. And that would be a 10.
Wow.
I am giving the Thunder a 10.
Whoa.
I
love it.
But
Is this real life? No.
Yeah.
I know. It's quite late here in London right now. I feel like I'm in a dream.
You're in the episode of the Twilight Zone, Jack. This is all of a
Like a
figment of
Rick
your
and Morty.
imagination.
Like, am I in the right
Yes.
reality right now? Is this?
Yeah.
Have I gone into a different reality?
Yeah, so I'm giving them a 10. I give the Pacers a 10, and those are my two highest. Paul George is still my favorite player. So it brings I still am going to follow Paul George, even though he left my team. It's not like I don't hold ill will against players like that. It's a business. You have to understand that. I feel like if you're going to be around basketball, I think you have to have that objective kind of mindset. So I
But what
give
about
it
that
10.
burnt jersey, Kory? I thought there was a burnt jersey. Didn't you have isn't there some flames in your jersey somewhere?
No,
You one of those dudes?
No, it's I still have my number 24 Paul George jersey. That is sentimental.
Good
I
man.
will keep that. But yeah, Westbrook obviously is phenomenal to watch. I watched a ton of games last year, like I mentioned, the Orlando game, the Denver Nugget game. He's going to be playing alongside my favorite player. And I personally have always enjoyed Melo. He's not as electric as he was during his Denver Nugget days or his early Knick days, but Melo is still extremely fun to watch for me personally. And, I'm pretty sold on what Adams and all these guys can do.
Yeah, honestly, you guys are right. This is an 8 out of 10 for me on my skewed scale. And like you said, Melo's kind of a player I've started to like. When everybody starts to hate somebody or you just kind of say they're washed up when they're really not completely washed yet, I kind of end up liking them a little bit more. And I'm really excited to see what he can do in this situation because I think it's a big season for him and like his reputation. Everybody's been talking about, like you mentioned, Melo's not a leader. He can't win. Now he has no excuses, and this is going to be his best situation to, have playoff success.
One final one, guys, before we get on to our TV shows. Who do you think takes the last shot? Down by 2, down by 1. Is
Westbrook.
it Russ? Is it PG?
Westbrook. Westbrook.
Well, Westbrook's going to have the final say. He's the one earning the Supermax money. Or does Billy Donovan actually empower a pop-like system where it's like, let's just get the best guy for the best shot and, do some decoy plays? I think, like you mentioned only a few segments ago, Nick, it's going to be a really interesting season for Billy Donovan, a sort of proving season. Can he actually, make some plays, make this system, get some creativity out there? Because, they're not all three of those guys aren't great in the clutch time. As I mentioned on the Timberwolves pod, Paul George is 18% in the clutch. Melo's 30% in the clutch, and Russell Westbrook's 31% in the clutch. So they certainly don't have the percentages going their ways. So I think they might have to actually put some egos aside and just see who has the best shot and actually pass the ball.
Yeah, I think Russ takes that game-winning shot 8 out of 10 times, and one time Paul George will be wide open for one, and he'll probably miss and be 0-15, and the other one will be Carmelo Anthony for the other one.
I think, like you said, Jack, from a basketball perspective, if, he's getting triple team, he's going to pass the ball. But if it's a one-on-one situation where Westbrook is one-on-one with another player, I think he wants to take that shot. And I think Paul George and Carmelo are okay with that just because, this is his team. He's the guy making the Supermax. He just won MVP, had a historical season. It's kind of hard for you to be like, Russ, you don't deserve that shot. Like if if the matchup is there, then yeah, go for it. Like if Russ is getting double teamed, you got an open shot or you got a bad defender on you, let Paul George or Melo take it. But in going into the play and all things equal, I think Westbrook is taking that shot.
Yeah, you can't say no to that.
I'm really excited to watch this team and just
so fun.
I think storyline wise, we want to see how all the egos mesh. But I think, like you mentioned earlier, I think the Westbrook and Paul George, I think they'll be buddies. Even Carmelo, they were working out a lot in New York. So I think relationships are going to be okay. It's just going to be building the chemistry on the court. But you would watch OKC over what TV show that you like?
Now, I did mention these guys in passing. I'm sure fans have been listening. I'm going to get a lot of hate for this. It's got a huge online fan base.
Don't say it, Jack.
The show literally just ended. It's Rick and Morty.
I'm really disappointed right now. I'm more disappointed in you than I was when Kory picked Dragon Ball Z.
You can't be like, look, Rick and Morty. has probably less rewatchability than a Dragon Ball Z or a Simpsons or a Seinfeld or It's Always Sunny. And in saying that, I have rewatched Rick and Morty twice. So look, this is a 9. Like it's once you get into the A plus range, you got to make the big calls, Nick. You know, Burn Notice is off the cards for you, so I'm really interested to hear what is up for you. And for Kory, giving it a 10 out of 10. This has to be like goes.
It is actually. You ready? I'm picking. This is my favorite show of all time. It's undefeated. It lasted a beautiful 6 seasons with a 6 season that was 2 parts. The Sopranos.
Oh, yeah, I knew that. I had I thought that was going to be your pick, or I thought you might say Sons of Anarchy, because I know that's one of your big time shows as well.
Yeah, Sopranos is for me.
All right.
Especially that last episode.
I'm trying to talk here because I'm still really upset about Jack picking Rick and Morty. And then talking about rewatchability, I'm already on my 3rd time watching it, and I just found out about the show like 4 weeks ago. But yeah, I'm really obsessed. I respect that. And that's probably my Halloween costume, just throwing that out there.
Ooh, that's a good idea.
Yeah, so like
I was there when that was thought of, so I'm happy.
He was. And there might be an addition because, Little Rick.
Yes.
Jack an episode with his Little Rick. We were originally, me and my girlfriend were going to be Rick and Morty, but now we're thinking about being Rick and Little Rick. So
what about, I'd prefer to be Pickle Rick.
Pickle Rick? Yeah, that would be a good one too.
Pickle Rick was good. Or even like Evil Morty. I like
Evil Morty is a good one. Yeah, that is a good one. But enough about Rick and Morty, who Jack already threw enough shade about for the whole year for me. But I'm going to go with, this is a tough one. I mean, I'm going to pick a show that like people probably don't really know much about, but I like it. And I know some other people like it. Person of Interest. You guys seen that? No?
Yeah, Crickets. I've never seen that show.
Yep. Yeah, I've heard of the name.
It's a pretty good Netflix show. It's a little bit bad acting, but I like the plot. It's similar to like a Burn Notice. Actually, Kory Avi put me onto this show. So I enjoy it. I watched the whole season pretty quickly. It's not one of those, headline shows, but if you're on Netflix and you like, that spy type stuff, you'll be interested in this.
All right. Well, I'm looking for a show, so I'll add it to my my list.
Give it a chance. But it's getting hard for the shows, and I'm gonna have to pick shows that I like, and I like weird. I have a weird taste, so I think I promise the shows are good if you like good plots. I can't promise I like great acting. All I care about is the storyline. If you can keep me sucked in, you're good to go.
The storyline in the NBA season.
Yeah, I mean, even the NBA. You could talk about a bad team that got a good storyline. I might check it out. But that wraps it up for today. Jack, Kory, as always, great to have you guys on. Thank you for taking the time to do this. And as always, thank you, everybody, for listening.
Ciao, ciao, OTG.
Hoodie Kory checking out.